Good evening and welcome to News Central TV. My name is Mazino Appeal. Here are some stories making rounds beyond the continent. We begin the news in the Middle East, where at least 33 people, including 12 children, have died from malnutrition in Gaza in the past 48 hours. That's according to the Hamas-run health ministry. The United Nations Secretary General warns that Gaza's last lifelines are collapsing as humanitarian conditions deteriorate at an accelerating pace amid Israel's ongoing offensive. UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy says he is sickened by the grotesque scenes, joining 27 nations in condemning the deaths of hundreds attempting to secure food from Israeli-operated aid points. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization reports its operations in central Gaza have been compromised after its facilities were attacked. Israel maintains its troops came under fire and notes coordination with international groups while restricting free media access. Meanwhile, the United Nations warns that Israel must put an immediate end to the killings, to the destruction and the wide-scale violations of international law. It also cautioned that permanently displacing Gaza's population would be a war crime and possibly a crime against humanity.
Latest Israeli airstrikes and ground operations will invariably lead to further civilian deaths and destruction of civilian infrastructure. Homes have already been destroyed and thousands have been forced to flee the area again. Their only choice is to go to the ever-shrinking areas of Gaza where hundreds of thousands are being forced together, making it difficult to deliver humanitarian assistance. Even these areas are not safe. I remind the Israeli government that permanently displacing people living under its occupation would amount to unlawful transfer, which is a war crime, and in certain circumstances may also amount to a crime against humanity. Rather than launching round upon round of new military attacks, there must be an immediate end to the killings, to the destruction, and the
Now joining me on the news to discuss this is Professor at the University of Manchester, Mukesh Kapila. He joins from Geneva, and international analyst Bolu Michael B. He joins from Manzini, Eswatini. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining this evening. Professor Mukesh, I'm going to start with you. Can you please help us understand the scale and urgency of the multiple, or rather the malnourished deaths reported recently in Gaza, particularly among the children?
Yes, from all the statistics that we know about, and the figures are difficult in Gaza to verify, malnutrition rates have doubled, at least doubled over the last 2-3 months. What it means is that at least 10 to 15% of children, which is under 5s, are severely malnourished, acutely malnourished, and that is, I think, a statistic unprecedented anywhere in the world.
So, Bolu Michael is with us. Bolu, how do attacks on medical and also humanitarian facilities impact the delivery of aid and the health situation on ground?
Well, it's quite an unfortunate situation going on right now in Gaza because, blocking humanitarian aid stops doctors and aid workers from helping people. Well, we're seeing that hospitals and clinics are being damaged and destroyed as well. I mean, humanitarian or civilian facilities like hospitals and schools, they are being attacked, which is quite unfortunate. Medicines and food, can't reach those that need them, and it's very important that persons who need this aid actually get them. Right now, Israel is in control of humanitarian supply because they fear that Hamas might hijack the entire process. We're also seeing sick and injured people, not having anywhere to go, not having anywhere to get the required treatment that they need to survive. So the entire health system right now is weak, and it's leading to more death and suffering.
Bolu Michael, the international community continue to condemn what's happening inside of Gaza there, but how much influence do these condemnations have on the crises?
Well, I'll say it's kind of put pressure on Israel to change its ways, change its system and methods. Right now, for example, they have a humanitarian system whereby they're in control of the aid supply. Like I said earlier, because they're afraid that this aid might get into the hand of Hamas or be mismanaged in some way. I mean, the aim of every opposing party or every warring party is to weaken their opponents, right? And then the one that's kind of holds control on the humanitarian supply kind of has an edge. I think it also raises, global attention and, much more media coverage on this situation, which can push governments, and to take legal and diplomatic action against Israel or against the party that seems to be much more oppressive. But as we know that what alone cannot drive change, cannot solve war, we need to have a real change. Words must be backed with strong action, and we hope we can see that in the coming weeks or months ahead.
Okay. Now, Professor Mukesh, with reports of Gaza's last lifelines collapsing, what sort of maybe short-term or long-term consequences might this humanitarian breakdown have?
I think it is a progressive thing. As we've been watching over the last few months, the amount of humanitarian aid coming in has been intermittent, and it has been gradually reduced. So if you look at the trends of aid delivered, it's been on a downwards track. And so intermittent supplies are getting more and more intermittent, and desperate people are even being attacked as they go for whatever is coming in. And so this is a progressive attrition. So we're not going to see any dramatic shifts immediately. What we're seeing is gradual shifts, but they're reaching a dramatic stage because malnutrition is not just prevalent in children, but there is famine conditions for many adults. And along with the lack of health care and the lack of clean water and medicines, we will see a gradual strangling of the population of Gaza.
But what about the media access? With the restrictions that we have on ground, how do we evaluate the information that we're getting from the humanitarian side? Professor Mukesh.
Well, actually, there is certainly lack of independent media access, and that hinders verification. Having said that, there are plenty of local journalists, and there are plenty of reports coming in from all directions. So if you triangulate those reports, if you, for example, have the same reports being reported from different angles by different people in different parts of Gaza, then I think you build up a pretty accurate picture of what is going on. So in that sense, unlike in other situations where I've been in the past many years ago, we have plenty of information coming out of Gaza, thanks to the courage of those who are able to report on the ground. And there's still remnants of social media, and even on the Israeli side, there is Israeli public also leaking information out. So actually, we know a hell of a lot of what is going on, and hell is the right word to use because it is what's going on.
Bolu, back to you. I'm wondering the role that international organizations and also government, what role can they play in improving humanitarian access, since we're talking about this access thing now? And also, how can they safeguard aid workers in conflict zones like Gaza?
Egypt, for example, has kind of, set the pace, or, is a typical example of, assistance by a nation to the people of Gaza. For example, they made their country an aid route. It's always been so. Countries can negotiate safe zones and aid routes. They can also send peace monitors or observers to see what's going on ground, to assess the situation, so that we know exactly where resources should be channeled to. They can also support local and international NGOs. A couple of them are on ground doing a lot of work. They can provide them with the resources they need. They can provide them with the protection that they need. And I'm sure it's going to go a long way for the people of Gaza. Countries can also demand that Israel, in fact, both parties, to respect international humanitarian law. It's very important that they adhere to the rules of engagement and ensure as much as possible that even though they have differences and are facing each other, that they are protecting civilian lives. And every war will always cost some funds. So they can provide funds, they can provide funding, they can provide supplies to provide the people of Gaza or everyone in need on both sides. They can provide them with their urgent humanitarian relief or needs.
Professor Mukesh, it can't be easy for the children who are living in these kinds of conditions. One has to wonder if any humanitarian agency is considering the mental state of these children.
Well, we know from my experience of many crises that prolonged humanitarian disasters like this one doesn't just have a physical effect, but also mental consequences, and these can last for the rest of a person's life. We also know that when you have acute malnutrition as a child, then the brain is affected and the brain's development is affected, and that cannot be recovered 100%. So the consequences of malnutrition, the consequences of illness are at a young age are permanent. And not only that, they are passed down the generations because women, for example, are unable to have normal childbirth or to have children who are healthy when born. And so definitely the mental trauma and the social trauma adds to the physical trauma, which is obvious, but the fact that it's a generation-long thing, is transmitted down the line, is something that many people don't realize.
Balu, final question here. In your opinion, what are the challenges that Israel faces in balancing security concerns with humanitarian obligations?
Well, Israel, has been facing this challenge even among their citizens. Some believe that it should be a total wipeout of Hamas, and some feel like they should have a level of negotiation. So they face the challenge of balancing the interest of those within the country, and Israel has been taking control of humanitarian supply because they believe that if they don't, it may reach Hamas instead of the civilians that actually need them. They are under pressure to protect their own citizens as well from attacks, either at home or even abroad or even on the battlefield. It's quite difficult to track what's going on in any war zone, especially the aid that has been distributed. So the war between the two parties is not any different. They are facing the same difficulty as well. And there's been international criticism combined with the criticism from nationals, and they will find it difficult to balance the international criticism, local criticism against their internal security priorities. So the challenge of allowing aid while fighting a group is embedded, is embedded in certain civilian. And what I mean by this is that Hamas always have, they use children and women as human shield. This is another challenge that they might face. I think both parties are probably doing the same. It's quite common in this kind of war, and it will always remain a challenge if humanitarian obligations are not well monitored.
Professor Mukesh, I'm hoping that you can summarize this final question here, but it's a very important one because when we think of wars, we always think of the casualties as the people who actually live there, in this case, Gazans, or rather the Palestinians, or maybe even others who might be there. But no one considers the humanitarian aid workers themselves, that they're also exposed to the same conditions. So what are the impact of these conditions on the workers themselves as they continue their duties?
Oh, absolutely. I think, firstly, let's remember that most of the humanitarian workers in Gaza are local people, okay? Because international staff of humanitarian organizations have not been allowed to come in. Maybe a few come in now and then when Israel is in a good mood. But otherwise, I think 95 to 99% of all humanitarian staff are local people. And of course, they're living and dying alongside their own people. For example, the Palestinian Red Crescent staff, they're all local people. For example, many of the doctors and nurses who are managing the clinics, which still exist, they're all local people. So in that sense, I think the humanitarian workers are bearing the same burdens and witnessing the same activities. The difference being, of course, that when you're a humanitarian worker, say as a doctor or a nurse, then clearly you have to both balance. You have your own trauma, you have your own families are affected. You may yourself be living in a tent. Your family may also have been killed, as we've already seen that with some doctors and healthcare workers in the past. But you can't afford to dwell on your own personal loss or grief, because your professional duty and your humanitarian impulse and your code of conduct requires you to help others. So the local humanitarian workers are really getting it from all directions. They're frustrated because they can't do so much. Their families are suffering, they themselves are suffering, and yet they cannot give up, because it's a job as humanitarians to not look at their own suffering, but to help relieve the suffering of others. So in my opinion, they are heroes.
Heroes indeed. I think there's no other better word. Thank you, Professor Mukesh, and thank you, Willow Michael, for having this conversation with me.
Thanks for having me.
Moving on now. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas told her Israeli counterpart Tuesday that Israel's military must stop killing civilians at aid distribution points in Gaza. Meanwhile, a spokesman for the bloc also condemned any attacks against the World Health Organization after the agency said its facilities in Gaza had been targeted by Israeli forces. Kallas wrote on X that the killing of the civilians seeking aid in Gaza is indefensible. The European Union early this month said it had struck a deal with Israel to allow more access into Gaza amid Israel's devastating military operation.
The killing of civilians seeking aid in Gaza is indefensible. She spoke with her counterpart, the Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar, to recall the understanding that we had, EU and Israel, on aid flow, and she made it clear that IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, must stop killing people at distribution points. Indeed, all options remain on the table if Israel doesn't deliver on its pledges.
Meanwhile, a severe heat wave sweeping Iran has led to widespread disruptions in water and electricity supplies, with reservoir levels plummeting to their lowest in a century, state media reported on Tuesday. Since Friday, extreme temperatures have gripped at least 18 provinces, including the capital Tehran, where the mercury hit 40 degrees Celsius for the first time this year. In southern and southwestern regions, temperatures exceeded 50 degrees Celsius. To conserve resources, government officials in that area, at least 15 provinces, including Tehran, were ordered closed on Wednesday, a measure that may be extended. Tehran faces its fifth year of drought, with dam levels at just 14% capacity, causing prolonged water outages and raising serious concerns over the city's water security amid a historic rainfall deficit. Authorities urge residents to ration water and electricity as the heat wave is expected to ease by Thursday.
اولا که این گرما هیچ بی برقی بی آبی باعث میشه خب آب نداشته باشیم. الان ما خودمون 10 روز آب نداشتیم، نه همه جوره واقعا زندگیمون به چیز خورده بود، به یعنی خیلی سخته. یعنی اگه این گرما ادامه پیدا کنه، اگه این بی آبی ادامه کنه، یعنی دیگه هیچی نمیمونه، نه درختی میمونه، نه فضای سبزی میمونه، نه اصلا زندگی ادامه میتونه داشته باشه.
مردم به خوبی نمیتونن کار روزمرهشون رو انجام بدن، فعالیتشون کمتر میشه، مجبورن که بیشتر تو خونه بمونن، راندمان کار رو میاره پایین‌تر و اینکه اونها دسته هم که مجبورن که بیان بیرون از خونه. خب
To North America now. President Donald Trump has expressed confidence on Tuesday that the United States will reach a trade deal with the Philippines as he welcomed President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. to the White House. Marcos aims to leverage Manila's status as a key U.S. ally in Asia to negotiate a more favorable agreement ahead of a looming August 1 deadline when 20% tariff on Filipino imports are set to take effect. The two leaders planned discussions focused on deepening security ties and economic cooperation amid growing strategic competition with China in the Indo-Pacific region. Marcos emphasized Manila's readiness to negotiate a bilateral deal that fosters strong, mutually beneficial partnerships. The White House highlighted their shared commitment to a free and prosperous region during the visit. And France's industry minister, Marc Farachi, on Tuesday called for Europe to adopt a firm and united stance in trade negotiations with the U.S. administration amid threats of a sharp increase in tariffs, potentially up to 30% on EU imports. Speaking after a National Industry Council meeting, Farachi rejected proposals to accept 10% tariff, labeling it a bad idea that would harm key European sectors such as aerospace, pharmaceuticals, and automotive industries. He emphasized the need for solidarity among EU members and warned Brussels to be prepared to deploy countermeasures if negotiations fail. With an August 1st deadline approaching, France is urging the European Commission to take a tougher position against Washington's accelerating trade threats, resisting quick compromises to protect Europe's economic interests.
Des droits de douane d'un niveau comme celui qui a été annoncé par l'administration américaine, c'est-à-dire de 30%, aurait des conséquences absolument dramatiques sur l'ensemble des chaînes de valeur qui sont extrêmement intégrées. Certaines filières nous ont fait part d'un risque mortel. J'utilise le terme qui a été prononcé si d'aventure des droits de douane à 30% devaient être appliqués. Face à tout cela, la position de l'Europe doit être une position...
Now, there's little hope for a breakthrough as Moscow plays down expectations for a third round of peace talks with Ukraine. A meeting expected to take place in Istanbul on Wednesday remains unconfirmed by the Kremlin, with both sides still far apart on how to end the war. For News Central, international correspondent Afia Hagen here has more.
The Kremlin says a lot of work is still needed before any real dialogue can begin, and it's not even confirming a time for the talks. President Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov warned there's no reason to expect what he called miraculous breakthroughs. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Kyiv is ready to negotiate on key humanitarian issues, including the return of prisoners and abducted children, and a possible meeting of leaders. But Moscow insists it's premature to talk about direct talks between Zelensky and Putin. Ukraine will send National Security Chief Rustem Umerov to lead its delegation. Russia hasn't confirmed its lineup, but previously sent controversial writer and Kremlin loyalist Vladimir Medinsky, whom Kiev dismissed as a powerless figurehead. Meanwhile, the violence on the ground continues. Russia claims it captured another village in Donetsk. Ukrainian drone strikes killed 3 civilians in Russian-occupied Kherson, whilst a 10-year-old boy died in Kramatorsk in a Russian drone and missile barrage. Both sides say they've intercepted dozens of incoming drones, part of a surge in long-range attacks. With deadly strikes still landing and no clear roadmap for peace, the battlefield remains as active as ever, and any diplomatic breakthrough appears to be a distant hope. For News Central, I'm Afia Hagen.
Now, Russian lawmakers have passed a controversial bill that fines internet users for deliberately searching or accessing content labeled as extremist. The legislation approved by the State Duma, with around 60 MPs opposing it, targets those who knowingly seek such material online, including through virtual private networks, VPNs, used to bypass government restrictions. Fines range from 3,000 to 5,000 rubles. Russia currently maintains a list of over 5,400 banned materials, encompassing books, political slogans, artworks, music, and websites. Critics warn this law severely restricts press freedom and access to information, criminalizing reading and risk expanding censorship. The bill now awaits approval by the Upper House and President Vladimir Putin's signature before taking effect on September 1st, 2025.
Нормы прямо, то это нормы. Они не касаются тех, кто распространяет. За эту ответственность уже есть, и этих людей наказывают, и правильно делают. Это касается тех, кто просто получил доступ. И если читать прямо, то он коснется и тех, кто просто пытается выяснить, не столкнулся ли он с экстремистским материалом. И если он борется с экстремистами и ищет эти материалы, если читать прямо, вы этих людей должны наказать. То есть он усложняет борьбу с экстремизмом.
Мы понимаем, в какое время мы живем. Идет война. И во время войны нужно принимать меры, которые, где-то ограничивают нас. В то же время они предотвращают более страшные преступления.
And that's all on Beyond the Continent this evening. But remember, you can send in your eyewitness reports to the WhatsApp number on your screens now. And do follow us on social media. We're at News Central TV. You can watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, GoTV channel 23, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV, and of course on YouTube. Many thanks for watching. My name is Mazino Appeal.